So anyway, Mark Boxell and I continue to look with this kind of launching pad. We've looked at other illnesses where we think maybe a similar pattern could be detected. And one of them, which I have to say was amazing to me, is polio. This is a piece that we wrote in 2011, right after our book came out. We'd kind of gotten interested in this during the writing of our book, but it didn't really fit. But polio is an odd illness too. It's a little like autism in that it was not around before the late 1800s. Yes, yeah, it is weird. And this is not in dispute, because polio, you're not going to mistake a paralyzed child for not a paralyzed child. They just weren't around, and so again, something happened. Now, what the medical world says happened, it's called the hygiene hypothesis. Have people heard of that? I'll try not to make fun of it, but it is. The idea is that around 1900, as we were becoming more industrialized and more inventions came along, that hygiene and sanitation improved to the point that kids no longer got polio in the first year or two of life, or the first year. They were no longer exposed to it through feces, and because they had flush toilets, and so they didn't get it then. And if they had gotten it then, their mother's antibodies and maternal and nursing would have protected them. But since they got it now at 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10, they didn't have that protection, and therefore polio was a much more severe illness, which I just think is the most bizarre thing I've ever heard, because you don't hear that about anything else. I mean, it's like, well, let's see, what can we say to make sense of polio? Because, but why not cholera? Why not anything else? So what happened, there has been a counter-argument about polio for a long time. Even back as early as the early 1900s, some people made the observation that it seemed to be associated with a fungicide. Here we go, with fungicides again. This fungicide happened to be lead arsenate, which is as bad as it sounds. You take a little lead, put a little arsenic in it, put it in a can, put some water in so it's not so strong, and spray it on everything. Spray it on apples. They invented it in Massachusetts to fight the gypsy moth, which was all of a sudden had started attacking apple trees. What's interesting is in 1893, there was a medical journal article that said in Boston that said, "Is polio more prevalent this year?" And it was. And from that point, it started to spread, these epidemics. And as I said, almost immediately, some people said, this looks like, we spray these trees in this, and crops in May and June, and then people get polio in May and June, and, it's not polio, it's this toxic thing that is causing this paralysis. I mean, arsenic and lead are known to cause paralysis. So that was, a counter theory that was considered heresy, right, by the medical community, because polio, there's clearly is a polio virus, et cetera, et cetera. And then when it got worse at the end of World War II, DDT, right, kind of replaced lead arsenate, so that would be a logical thing. So there was these two competing theories, really. One of them completely trashed and ignored. So our theory is a little different, based on just a lot of work that we did on a lot of things. Our theory, and we wrote this in 2011, is basically that it took the two things together. That essentially polio was a bug that kids got, kind of like, name a bug that kids get, I don't know, the flu rotavirus or something that's just not that serious most of the time. But that if a kid who had that infection got a dose of this stuff, it could create the conditions that would allow it to get into the nervous system. And, you know, it's a complicated, well, it's not complicated, I don't like that word, but it takes some elaboration, but basically the idea is arsenic in particular is bad for people, right? They didn't realize it then, or they, thought it was okay in the doses that they were using. But it particularly, at a high dose, it'll kill you dead quickly. A low dose, it really messes with your GI tract, and it can create this permeability thing that could cause the polio virus to get up here and in your anterior horn cells at the top of your spine and give you polio. So that is our theory, which we, as I say, put forward a few years ago. And I've continued to work on that, and I wanted to show you a little of where I am with it now, which is somewhat in the middle, but I find it interesting, and I welcome people's ideas and thoughts. One thing about polio that people forget is, and I wasn't aware of it, is it attacked a lot of people in different places in weird ways in the country, on farms, in big cities too, but it just made no sense at all the way it was going around. And I found some maps that I think are interesting. This is the whole era of polio, of big epidemics, 21 to 55. And look at that glob in the, oh look, I can do that, I didn't realize that. I can do that glob in the middle. What is that? That is not the population center of the country. It's just interesting, right? I mean, whatever it means. And then here's another one. This is the what?
The goiter belt.
The goiter belt?
Yeah, Wisconsin, Minnesota.
Oh, really? See, that's interesting. Goiters.
Iodine deficiency.
Iodine, okay. That's interesting. I'm always listening for new ideas because I pick up them a lot. So, this shows the eastern half of the country, more affected than the west, which makes sense. There's nobody in the Great Basin there anyway. But look at the northern part of the country, and you can almost kind of see some of that same center blob. And then look at that, how it goes up into Canada. That's really interesting. That is really interesting. And let me just show you one other defined area. I'm going to go to Australia here and show you how this is polio. It's the same kind of chart. The areas that are the darkest are the most intense. Here's just another map of Australia. So, anyway, then, as I've said, that the idea was it was lead arsenate, which I fully believe. I mean, you got to be kidding me that people were getting, infants were getting doses of lead arsenate in their food. But I've started to wonder about DDT, and one reason is this. Here is the wheat growing area of Canada. How about that, huh? Look at that. And and this is the wheat growing area of Canada. And this is the grain growing area of Australia. And there's the polio area of Australia. Now, you can overdo it. I mean, this is also where people lived, I'm sure, in Australia. They were growing other stuff, although you were saying there, this is the wheat.
Yeah, no one lives as much in the northern parts of the world.
Yeah. So this one just blows my mind. I mean, I live for this kind of thing. You go, what the heck? I mean, this thing, even look at that little kind of blip at the top left of that. It's quite amazing to me. So this makes me think about our theory a little bit, because we're talking, especially that Canadian one, it's a lot of grain up there. They don't grow corn, it's too cold. They certainly are not growing, I don't think they're growing tomatoes. I mean, this is hardy, winter wheat, other stuff like that, rapeseed you said. Potatoes, yeah. So here's an idea. What about Sarazan? The stuff that the father of case 2 was messing with, which is for wheat, oats, and barley. That's what that is for. So I've started to wonder, could polio and autism essentially be the same damn thing, have the same cause? And I think that they do have the same cause in terms of fungicides are part of it for autism, and I think they may be almost all of it for polio. But what if it was the same fungicide? Wouldn't that be interesting? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm working on it. Even Mark Blaxell thinks I may be out of my mind on this one, so whoops, we'll see. But, if you could link, one thing we want to do is we want to get some changes made, right? We want to get mercury out of these vaccines. We want to get some of these very bad poisonous fungicides that are killing bees and messing up the environment. We want to get those regulated better. And wouldn't it be nice if you could link polio and autism and say, you guys, you did this with your sick, literally, use of these terribly toxic things that you have refused to look at the patterns of. And there's one more thing to say about polio, which is that it's back. We just ran a story on our blog this week that we broke. I got the information from a doctor who had gotten a circular on it. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, 3 maybe, there was stories about kids who got kind of normal respiratory illnesses and then paralyzed, which was, permanently paralyzed. Some cases it was one arm, some cases they were on ventilators and died. And it was maybe 100 or so, or more than 100. And I wrote about that a lot at the time because I just thought, I think I know what's going on here, which is it's these same, it's not mercury because they don't have that it's not mercury from fungicides because they don't use that anymore. It could be mercury from vaccines, it could be another fungicide, probably is another fungicide, along with the ones 2 or 3 years ago they said they found cultured something called EV68, which was the number for one of the dozens of enteroviruses. Polio is an enterovirus. So, enteroviruses, we know they have the capacity for whatever reason to cause paralysis. And so, but they weren't really sure exactly. And this time around, there's a new spate of cases, and they don't see any common virus yet. So maybe it's not even the virus at all. Maybe it's just glyphosate or just, something. But they didn't even publicize this. Somebody leaked me a warning from a state government saying we're hearing about this. And then I went to the CDC site and I found a chart that shows what's happening. The blue is last year and the orange is this year. And so, you can just see what's happening here, which is scary as hell. And then they don't even have the July figure yet, which was even higher. And it's gonna keep going up, and bad stuff's gonna happen. This is what happens when you don't look at the patterns because they might not be what you want to see, right? You might not want to see it, I think.